Hello guys, how are you doing today? I'm doing great. Today we are going to be reading the story of Susan La Flesche Picotte. It's a hard name to say. She was a Native American doctor, but this story is a biography, so let's get right into it. Susan La Flesche Picotte was the first female Native American doctor in the United States. After completing medical school, she returned to her home and began work as a doctor at Reservation School. In this expert, her first weeks as not only the school doctor, but a doctor for the whole reservation are told. So that means like the whole town, the whole town. So that must have been a lot for her to work with. Now we're getting into the story part. Susan wrote a letter of application on the very night that she told Rosalie, her sister, she wanted to position of reservation physician. Then she waited anxiously for a reply. At last, the letter arrived. She tore it open eagerly. Well, finally, she sighed. She carried it into the kitchen, where her mother was preparing supper. I got the appointment, she said. I don't get any more money, though. Her mother looked up. So much more work and no more pay, she asked. That's what the letter says, as there are no funds available except for your present salary as a physician to the government school. We will be unable to pay any additional monies for your additional services as a reservation physician. Well, anyway, I have the title now to see what I can do with it. The same night, the first snow of the winter fell. Susan was soon inundated with a siege of colds, grapes, and pneumonia. It was as the first snowstorm had been in a signal for the winter illness to attack. She had laid her plans carefully before entering into her new contract to do 2 jobs for the price of one. She would spend mornings at schools and make house calls in the afternoon. The only problem she soon discovered was that there weren't enough hours in the day. I don't know why babies always want to be born in the wee hours of the morning, she said to Rosalie, stopping at her sister's house one day on the way to school. She'd been up since midnight and would not have time to go home before she was due at school. She was glad to have a place to clean up and get a cup of coffee. Sue, you can't go on this way, her sister said. You'll ruin your own health. Susan sighed. But what else can I do, Ro? It was a bad winter, one of the worst Nebraska had seen in many years. seen in many years. The north wind blew in icy gusts seen in many... So, it was a bad winter, one of the worst Nebraska had seen in many a year. The north wind blew in icy gusts, finding its way around poorly fitted window frames and under ill-hung doors into the Omaha's house. Many of the houses were getting old, and they had not been kept in repair. When Susan rode up to one which of the window pane... Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. When Susan rode up to one in which a window pane was out, the whole stuffed carelessly with old rags. Anger flared in her inside. She knew lay a child on the verge of Bermuda. "Tom," she said when she entered, "there is no excuse for that." She pointed to the window. "When you get your next allowance, buy a piece of glass and some putty to replace the pane." "You just like Iron Eye," she said. "You just like Iron Eye," she said, and Susan detected resentment in his tone. "Always tried to tell us how to live." Susan bit her tongue and went about her task of examining the sick child. It was hopeless. She wondered, trying to each of them. But her father, Iron Eye, had never given up. One morning when she started to school, the wind was particularly vicious. Reluctantly, she turned Pie, her horse, into it. When they reached the school grounds, she put him immediately into the shed that was provided for bad days. As she turned to the schoolhouse, she noted that the sky looked ominously. It took all her strength to wrench the door open against the wind. "I think we're going to get snow," she called to Margaret as she entered. Marguerite turned back, and Susan saw the worried look on her face. "Oh dear, I hope not. Charlie's sick again?" "He had an awful cough, Sue, and he was so hot last night. I know he has fever. Has a fever. And he went out to look after the stock this morning. I was hoping you could go by and see him this afternoon." "Of course I'll go. A little snow won't stop me," Susan replied with a smile, hoping to cheer her sister. As the morning progressed, the wind howled and the snow grew heavier. In a moment, lungs in her work. Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. As the morning progressed, the wind howled and the snow grew heavier. In a moment, lull in her work, Susan glanced out the window and discovered she could no longer see the row of trees formed a windbreak for the school building. She felt a little tug on her conscience. Some of the children lived quite a distance from the school. Perhaps they should be getting home. It wasn't long until the teachers were concluding her. Do you think we should dismiss school if it keeps this up? I think it would be wise to get the children on their way. It certainly isn't getting any better. So an early dismissal was agreed upon. Susan was helping the teachers bundle the children into coats and overshoes, trying mufflers on the mouths and noses, and giving instruction to the older ones to keep tight of the hands of the younger brothers and sisters. When the outside door burst open, a man stumbled in. He was so caked with the snow that at first they didn't recognize him. "Dr. Susan," he cried, "come quick. My Minnie." "Oh, is it you, Joe?" she said. "Has your wife started labor?" He nodded. "But she's bad, doctor. Not like before. Come on and warm up. Then go home and put lots of water on the stove to heat. I'll be along shortly." Joe didn't linger. As soon as the children were on their way and she had straightened up her office, Susan sought out Margarita. "I'll have to wait to see Charlie until after I deliver Minnie Whitefeather's baby. Joe said he's having a bad time, so I may be late." "All right. Be sure to bundle up," Marguerite said. "It looks like a storm's getting worse." "That I will. I always come prepared," Susan assured her. She pulled her stocking cap down over her ears and donned the heavy wool mittens her mother had knit for her. "I hope you will be right," Marguerite said. "It is a long way over there." "Don't worry, you can depend on Pie." Susan waved a cheery goodbye and plunged out into the storm. She had to fight her way to shed. Already drifts were piling high. "I hope the children are all safely home by now," she thought. Her pony was nervous. "Good old Pie," she said, patting the chic necklace as she mounted. "When you were a young one, she went racing across the hills and didn't think you were going to have to plow though all kinds of weather me when you grew older, did you?" The Whitefeathers lived on the northernmost edge of the reservation. Susan turned Pie onto the road and plodded into the storm. "Good boy," she said encouragingly, but she couldn't hear her words above the violent shrieking of the wind. Nor surely could she tell whatever they were following the road. She could only trust Pie. It seemed to her that the storm grew worse by the minute. Suddenly Pie stopped, turning her head back as if asking Susan what he should do. She tried to wipe the caked snow from her eyes to see what was wrong and found that the fingers were stiff. But she saw Pie's problem. A huge drift lying across the path. "We'll have to go around it, Pie." She pulled him to the left until they reached a point where the drift tapered off. Pie moved around it, and Susan thought, "Now we can find the road again." If we were on the road, she pulled on the right rein, but she couldn't tell whether they were going north for now the storm seemed to be swirling around them from all directions. Soon another drift blocked their way. But this time Pie walled through the strange swimming motion. How did he know he could get through that one and not the other? She wondered suddenly. Having manufactured the drift, the pony stopped. "Get up, Pie, we have to go on," she urged. He did not move. She slapped the stiff reins on his neck, but to no avail. She tried kicking the sides with her feet. She discovered were numb. "We'll freeze to death. Go on!" Still Pie refused to move. At length she dismounted. If she could walk on her nub feet, perhaps she could led him stumbling. She made her way to Pie's head. Then she saw, and she caught her breath in terror, for Pie stood with his head directly over a bundle in the snow, a bundle that she knew instantly was a child. "Oh my," she cried. She lifted the bundle into her arms. It was a boy. One of the little ones had turned out of school to find his way home. What were we thinking of? Susan railed at herself. "Jimmy, Jimmy," she cried, shaking the child. She scooped the snow off the eyelids. She stirred, and then his eyelids lifted. "Jimmy, it's Dr. Sue. You were asleep. Jimmy, you have to wake up now." She hoisted him in front of her on the pony, and holding him close to give him warmth from her body, she beat on his arms. The minute she was back in the saddle, Pie moved on. "Pie, bless you. You probably saved Jimmy's life." As Pie pressed on, she continued to talk to Jimmy, working on him as she talked, rubbing his hands, cradling his face against her. "We have to warm your nose," she told him. He began to cry. "You mustn't cry. Your tears will make cakes of ice." She straightened her eyes ahead, but she couldn't see nothing against the drifting snow. She had no idea how long they had been in the frozen winter white nightmare. Surely if they weren't going to the right direction, they should have reached the white feathers by now. "Pie's going to take us to where it is nice and warm." She smoothed Jimmy into herself. She said, If he doesn't, it is the end of all of us. You and me and him. You, me, and him. And maybe Minnie Whitefeather, too." She tried to keep the child awake, finding her constant that herself was going drowsy. 6 more pages. She well knew that to go to sleep. Oh my gosh, this doesn't sound right. She well knew that to go to sleep was a sure way to freeze to death. She must have dozed briefly, for the started. When Pie suddenly stopped, she roused herself to urge him on. "Get up, Pie. We can't stop now. We have Jimmy." She beat on his sides, but he refused to move. The snow had again caked her eyelids, and she pawed at it to unfeel fists. She supposed I'd come to another drift Pie couldn't manipulate. As she blinked hard to see what was suddenly aware of a sound that was born in the storm. Pie had wind. She felt the ripple of his neck. What did it mean? They saw. They were by the side of the building, sheltered from the wind. It was a barn. "Pie, you did it," she cried, as she tried sniffly to dismount with Jimmy. Strong arms were supporting her. It was Joe. So glad you're here, Dr. Sue. Was afraid you won't make it." "So was I," Susan said. "Please take care of Pie. We wouldn't be here except for him." Susan did not get to Marguerite and Charlie's that night, but she did deliver a baby girl. Nor did she get to her sister's home for 2 days following, for the storm raged on furiously through the night, wrapping the reversion in a tight white cocoon that could not be penetrated. There was no way to return Jimmy to his home or to let his parents know. Hold on 1 second. To parents to know that he was safe. Susan organized over this, but there was nothing she could do. There were 2 other white-feathered children, and Susan noticed that they came to have their hands washed before a meal. She noticed other things. The family's clothes were clean, and the blankets on their beds were clean. "You're doing well with your little family," she praised Minnie. Minnie smiled. "Remember the summer you were home from school when you rode around trying to teach people to wash their hands before meals? We believed you about germs and all." 4 more pages, guys. "And now you're teaching your children," Susan said approvingly. That's fine, Minnie. That's fine, Minnie. It means the upcoming generation will have a better time of it." When Susan eventually got to Charlie and Margarita's, she found Charlie in bed and those in Violet. Oh my gosh. Okay. She found Charlie in bed and there's a Violet, chilled his cough and frightening. She left medicine and tried to reassure him, but as her sister saw the door to the door, she shook her head. "His lungs are weak, Marg. You'll have to be careful." "I know," Margarita replied. "I wonder if she does know," Susan thought as she went on her snow-clogged way. There was no question in her mind that there he was comfortized as his mother had been. She had been doing all she could for him, but she feared he would be one she should save. Gentle Charlie, who was so good to everyone, especially to Marguerite. By early February, she was continuously confined to his bed, and there was no more Susan could do. Marguerite had to take leave from her teaching position to care for him. He died quietly as he lived just before the month was out. I thought maybe if he could make it till spring, Marguerite said distraught. Why you come home and live with Mother and me? Susan suggested. It would be too lonely for you here. They sent the word of Charlie's death to his family in Dakota, and his brother Henry came. He wanted the family represented at his funeral, he said. Henry's different, Susan remarked to Rosalie. Yet he reminds me of Charlie, sort of, a grayer edition. He's more worldly, Rosalie said. Susan smiled. It took Roe, who had less worldly exposure than the rest of them, to see straight through the point. Yes, you're right, she agreed. With the funeral over, Henry gone, and Marguerite back in the home where she and Susan had grown up, things settled down into a certain route. Marguerite went back to teaching, and Susan went on her doctoring. It's like the old days, Susan said one evening when she and Marguerite and her mother sat down to supper, only different. Marguerite said, yes, Susan agreed, thinking of how it had been when Naomi, her grandmother, and Rosalie had been at the table. Things don't say that the same, do they, Mother? One more page. Her mother shook her head. We have to learn to accept changes. That is one of the things Father tried to teach us long ago. Spring was late that year, but when it finally came, it was so beautiful that Susan at times thought she couldn't bear it. Sometimes when she was riding home from a call in early evening, she would dismount and let Pie graze while she grazed down the creeping willows that fringed the river like a band of characters lace. If it weren't too late, she would venture into the woods to look for violets and Dutchman's breeds in shy lady slipper. Those are flowers, by the way. So if you think they're actually lady slippers and Dutchman's, no, they're flowers. What a wonderful place to live, she thought. And more, she could see that her work was bearing more and more. She could see that her work was bearing fruit. I'm not accomplishing miracles, she told Roe one evening, but I can begin. But I am beginning to see some of the results of better hygiene and health habits, and we're losing fewer babies and fewer cases to infection. You don't need to convince me, Rosalie said. I can see it one hand. How pleasure Father would be. that is all, guys, today. Thank you guys so much for watching today's video. And I would like it if you would like the video and hit that big red subscribe button. Thank you and have a blessed day. Love you guys.